Yeah, I had a chance to look at the CNAG's findings on tax, so I'm going to take a closer look at them over the weekend. I want to say at the outset that I believe everyone should pay their fair share of tax in Ireland. As a government, we've prioritised taking the lowest paid out of the income tax net altogether, and around 30% of people, the lowest paid in Ireland, no longer have to pay income tax. I think that's a very good thing. And our focus now is very much on reducing income tax for those on middle incomes, those who in many ways often pay the highest burden of tax because the very rich can find ways not to pay, whether it's through legitimate tax incentives or whether it's through aggressive tax planning and tax avoidance in some cases. It's very often the middle who bear the largest burden of income taxation. That's why it's been our priority to raise the standard rate cut-off point so that fewer people have to pay that highest rate of income tax, and to ensure that people pay less income tax and USC. And while in any one budget it might only be €300 or €400 for a single person, or 600, 800 for a couple, when you do it over 3 budgets, that really starts to add up. It starts to add up to over 3 budgets, €800 for a couple. And when you see the 3-year effect, and we've been doing this for 3 years now, and the 5-year effect of these taxation changes, it really does make a difference in the take-home pay of those on middle incomes. I do think it's important, though, to make a distinction between wealth and income. Wealth and income are not the same thing. We will all know from our constituencies, meet people, often elderly people, who own a house that is worth over €1 million, maybe have life savings, but their income can actually be very small. Their income may only be 15,000, 20,000. They might be on a modest pension, so they have a low income and don't pay much income tax, but they may have quite a lot in assets. And also there are people who own businesses, and businesses may well be worth 50 million, but against that there may be significant debts. And there are a lot of people who claim to be rich, but mightn't be that rich at all when you actually take into account the levels of debts and borrowings they have. And of course, you may have a business that's valued quite highly, but not have any income from that business. Businesses are loss-making. And you'll often see it as well with farmers, that on paper the farm may be worth many millions, but actually the income that the farmer derives from that farm can be very small. So it's important to understand the difference between wealth and income. In terms of corporate profit tax, a lot has been done in the last couple of years to close some of those loopholes, whether it's the double Irish, some of the loopholes and incentives around intellectual property, whether it's statelessness, and whether it's accounting changes. A lot has been done, and that's why we're recognised by OECD and others of being compliant and being transparent when it comes to our corporation profit tax, notwithstanding what others may say about us. And that is why you've seen this year a very big increase in the take from corporation profit tax. You'll see another very big one this month when the tax returns, exchequer returns come out, and you will see that escalate. And actually, we're now taking in a lot of money from corporations in terms of corporation profit tax. And that's actually a risk, because we can't assume that money will be there next year or the year after. Because loopholes have been closed, because of accounting changes, we're probably going to have a windfall of corporation profit tax this year, which may not be there next year and the year after. And while some will busily be spending this money and finding ways to spend it, as a responsible government, we need to consider the possibility that this narrative about us not collecting lots of corporation profit tax is not correct. We actually are collecting a lot. And there's a risk that corporation profit tax, as it continues to escalate, as we continue to take in more and more of it, could become our new stamp duty. We could actually be vulnerable in this area, and we need to be careful not to think that a bumper year of corporation profit tax is something on the back of which we can make 5, 10-year long-term spending commitments, and we're not going to make that mistake, having learned from the mistakes of the past. On Friday we'll have the white paper that will give the up-to-date calculations on the deficit, while the changes and projections that Deputy Howland mentioned will reduce the deficit. That will be counteracted by overspending in other areas, most particularly health, but also justice and some other areas too. So we expect to come in bang on the nose in around a deficit of 0.2% this year as projected, with the good things being outweighed by overruns in other areas. In terms of the Sinn Féin budget, I had a chance over lunch to have a look at it. I do promise to study it in more detail. A couple of things did strike me, which I have to say I'm concerned about. I do think it is reckless. I do think what's proposed is irresponsible. First, Sinn Féin proposes increased borrowing. I think now is not the time for us to increase our borrowing. When the economy is going well, when it's growing fast, when you have full employment, that's when you should be balancing the books and trying to run a surplus. You don't increase borrowing. And you know, whatever social problems we have now, they will be much worse in a few years' time if we make reckless financial decisions, much worse. And now is not the time to increase borrowing. Now is the time to balance the books. There's also a proposal to cancel the rainy day fund. With Brexit coming up in only a few months' time, I think cancelling the rainy day fund is a very reckless proposal from Sinn Féin. And there's also a proposal for 20 tax hikes, raising €3 billion. And when you base your economic policy on 20 tax hikes raising €3 billion, it isn't long before you have to start hitting average people with your tax hikes. You might get away with that in one go, but if you're working over 5 years, if you're raising that kind of money out of taxation, it isn't long before you start hitting people on middle income. So I think Sinn Féin would go into that space very quickly.
Grŵp eile sin na ceistin idir an agus a dóigh a hí 9 to 12.
Questions 9 to 12 together. I met with Pope Francis during his visit to Dublin Castle on Saturday the 25th of August. The meeting provided an opportunity for both of us to discuss a number of issues, though regrettably not at any great length because of the short duration of our meeting. I welcome Pope Francis, who thanked me for the warm welcome he'd received on arrival. We spoke of the legacy of pain and suffering caused by the failures of the Church and State in Ireland, and we discussed how Ireland is still a country with strong faith, but that there is much to be done to bring about justice and truth and healing for the victims and survivors. I thank Pope Francis for his statements on climate change, on encouraging countries to accept refugees, and on international development. And we also spoke of Irish missionaries and how they continue their work today, and also about the Pope's home country of Argentina and the role of the Irish there. I used the opportunity during my speech later that day to expand on these issues and to express my strong wish that words needed to be followed by actions. I strongly believe in a greater separation of church and state, and I believe in freedom and respect for religion. And I hope that the visit of Pope Francis will be the opening of a new chapter in the relationship between Ireland and the Catholic Church, one where the Church is no longer at the centre of our society, but one in which it still has an important role to play. I think it's very beneficial that government should engage with churches and faith communities in a structured way. And on the 22nd of January 2018, I and several cabinet ministers met with representatives of the Church of Ireland, Presbyterian and Methodist churches in a formal meeting under the structured dialogue process between church and state. This was the second in a series of meetings that I'll be holding with dialogue partners. We discussed important social and economic issues facing Irish society, including Brexit, education issues, the Eighth Amendment, international development. And on the 31st of August, I and some of my colleagues held formal meetings under the structured dialogue process with representatives of the Catholic Church, led by Archbishop Eamon Martin. A wide-range discussion took place on a range of important national and international issues, including education again, Northern Ireland, overseas development and social justice. Some of these issues were discussed at these meetings were very challenging, and they are issues on which people have deeply held views and on which some consider to be a matter of conscience. Our discussions were valuable not just because they dealt with important issues, but particularly because they were conducted in an atmosphere of respect for the views of others, where everyone sought to be more constructive. Like public reps generally, I meet church leaders informally from time to time in the course of attending official or public events. In particular, with the recent visit of Pope Francis, I attended several events that were also attended by representatives of various religious groups. I've also had the opportunity to engage with the Muslim community around Eid and our Jewish community around Passover.
Thank you
very much indeed, Taoiseach. I was particularly interested in the speech you gave in the meeting with Pope Francis in Dublin Castle, and you set out there the mission of a new covenant, if I'm quoting you correctly. And I think later on in the speech you kind of made the point, for example, our hospital services, saying that you're looking for one based on a civic and scientific ethos, which I agree with. But I suppose the real question is, what exactly does that civic component include? And I hope it does and can include people of religious faith and communities, because they bring a lot to our society. They should not be central, they should not have control over the state in any way, but they have a contribution to make. I'm interested to hear from you how you think, where would that covenant be constructed? I mean, I hear of your meetings, cabinet meetings, but is there any wider mechanism you see us partaking in to develop that type of civic society? I was very taken by a book published by a number of people, including Jerry O'Hanlon, SJ, earlier on this year, A Dialogue of Hope. And he was setting out how the churches could actually be useful in the dialogue that the state needs to have across all our work. But I think actually now it's slightly changed almost. The covenant, or a conversation around such a covenant, might actually be useful to consider that covenant question.
Taoiseach, I raised with you last week or the week before the issue of the Tuam mother and baby home, and you reflected the fact that you had visited the site in a personal capacity. I understand you've made a commitment to meet with Catherine Corliss and with the survivors. You might just inform us if there has been any progress made on such a meeting. When the Pope visited, Minister for Children Catherine Zappone met with him, spoke with him, gave him a letter relating to the abuses carried out in mother and baby homes. And of course the Church has a responsibility in a case to answer in that regard, but so too does the state. I want to put it to you, Taoiseach, that the burial site at the Tuam mother and baby home must be secured, the remains exhumed, and every effort made to reunite the remains of the babies and children buried there with their families. That is the government's decision to make, and I think it's the right thing to do. I want to urge you to meet with some urgency Catherine Corliss and the survivors. They want to meet with you before Minister Zappone concludes her work. In respect of Minister Zappone's letter, she stated that she was of the view that the Church should contribute significantly to whatever decision is made. She stated that contribution should be done willingly, unconditionally and quickly. I want to know, Taoiseach, if there has been a response from the Pope to Minister Zappone's letter, and if so, what has that response been? Was it justified and reasonable? What is the financial ask of the Church?
In your speech to Pope Francis, you talked about a new chapter in the relationship between Ireland and the Catholic Church. Now, the message in the repeal referendum, and maybe in the visit itself, and the far lower than expected numbers going to see the Pope, I think clearly indicate, as you mentioned there, that the relationship the majority of people in this country want is a separation of the institutions of the state from church and religious doctrine. So the question is your vision of that going to be different from the old relationship when it comes to critical services, who runs them, what services they provide, particularly in areas like health and education? In particular, I want to ask you about the National Maternity Hospital, which I've asked about and others have asked about and are deeply concerned about. Peter Boylan wrote an alarming letter in the Irish Times in August, where he pointed out that the Sisters of Charity who are saying that the St Vincent's will have to uphold the values and vision of Mother Mary Aikenhead, founders of the Religious Sisters of Charity, and the Irish Catholic Bishops' Conference published in their Code of Ethical Standards for Healthcare that Catholic health facilities will not provide assisted fertility treatment, artificial contraception, morning after pills, surrogacy, abortion, a referral elsewhere for abortion, sterilisation or gender reassignment surgery. Now, if that is going to be the situation in the National Maternity Hospital run by St Vincent's, the new St Vincent's group, that would be absolutely unacceptable. So what I want, Taoiseach, is reassurance, and more importantly, the women of Ireland want reassurance that the National Maternity Hospital will not be abiding by that sort of code of ethics.
Brendan Harlan.
The Taoiseach some time to respond, but I want to ask two questions. Just very strongly in support of the point made in relation to the Tuam Mother and Baby Home. I understand that an initial document was handed by Minister Zappone to the Pope on his visit. I understand that a second letter, a more comprehensive statement of fact, was submitted to the Vatican, and I certainly would be interested in hearing what response, if any, has been received to that, and how. I presume the response was directed at the Minister for Children, but has the Taoiseach had sight of it, and should we have an openness in relation to the contents of this correspondence? And secondly, in relation to the general principles set out in the Taoiseach's speech in Dublin Castle, whether the suggestion now of a citizens' assembly, and I think that's a very good model, it's worked very well on a number of seemingly intractable and difficult and challenging questions, might be the model that you might consider now for the examination of the future ownership and control of education in this country.
I think we need, as a society, to remember that we shouldn't replace one intolerance with another. In an era when organised religions have already moved to a different role and significance in society, tolerance and respect for different faiths isn't just something which should apply to smaller religions. And the recent visit of the Pope, I think, was very welcome, as was his open and sincere approach to the issues which were raised with him. It is now 8 years since the government announced that the transfer of 50% of church schools to alternative patronage. The result delivered is actually the dramatic slowing down of divestment. The process adopted has crawled along and seems to have missed the opportunity to take up Archbishop Martin's offer to immediately divest large numbers of schools in Dublin. Can you explain if you've taken any initiative, Taoiseach, to move the divestment process out of its slumber? And have you followed up the Pope's visit with any specific engagement on the issues raised during the visit by you and indeed others, as has been referenced?
Taoiseach, I can just give you about 3 minutes to deal with all the questions.
Just on hospitals and healthcare institutions, the Minister for Health has asked Catherine Day, former head of the civil service in the European Union, to lead some work on that for us, on what the future relationship and governance of our hospitals might look like. I haven't had sight of that yet. Not quite sure how advanced that work is, but I look forward to seeing the outcome once it's ready. I do think that voluntarism in health and education does have value. Faith-based bodies, churches, have brought to schools and hospitals often a good ethos, not always, but often a tradition, experience and a loyalty to those institutions. And while things need to change, I wouldn't like to see all of those good things lost either. And we know the valuable work that religious and faith-inspired charities do in areas like housing and homelessness, for example, in areas like the alleviation of poverty. And I wouldn't like to see a separation of church and state that is so rigid and so cold that it would lose all that or refuse to engage with all that good work. And that positive spirit of voluntarism, which does exist in health and education as well. In terms of the new National Maternity Hospital, it will be publicly owned, and any medical procedure that is legal in Ireland, including assisted human reproduction and terminations of pregnancy, will be available in that hospital. It'll be publicly built and publicly owned, and that's how we intend it to develop. I should point out, though, that the National Maternity Hospital itself, in Holles Street, not too far from here, is actually a voluntary hospital. While he doesn't attend the meetings anymore, the chairman of the board is the Archbishop of Dublin. I think it's important to recognise the starting point as well as what we intend to be the end point. Deputy Ryan, I think, made some good suggestions, and I certainly give consideration to the proposals that he makes. In relation to Tuam, Mr Zappone is developing proposals as to how we should deal with the site of the former mother and baby home, and of course most particularly the remains of those children who are buried there. When she has that work done, or when it's substantially complete, it's my intention to, alongside her, organise those meetings. I don't know if there's been a reply from Pope Francis or the Vatican yet to her letters. To the best of my knowledge, there hasn't been, but I might not be up to date, so I'll certainly raise that with her when I see her again next week, or tomorrow if I do tomorrow. On citizens' assemblies, we've a few in train. There's one planned on gender equality and how we can further advance the gender equality agenda, and there's also one planned on the reform of local government in Dublin, a Dublin Citizens' Assembly, as to how that might look. And we've taken on board Deputy Ryan's suggestion that that particular one shouldn't be just citizens, that we should include in that councillors, perhaps even TDs and people who have an experience of local government, probably a little bit more like the Constitutional Convention model, 1/3, 2/3 than the Citizens' Assembly. But they're the ones we want to get done in 2019. We only have the bandwidth to do so many at any given time, but we may be able to do some more after that. On divestment of schools, it is happening too slowly. I acknowledge that criticism from Deputy Martin. But what's happening now in different school areas is surveys of preschool kids, and when that's done, it's going to inform us as to what parents want, and that will allow us to speed up that process again when we have it.
Michael Chinchin, Kaimaj Bugger Raken, a question Hagan Ara Culture, Irakta, August Geltakta, August Revishan. Boylem Cornell Duncha, that 19 deputies have submitted matters under Standing Order 29A, which will be listed in the official debate. The matters raised by the following deputies have been selected for discussion. Deputy Thomas Byrne to discuss the State Commission's appeals process. Deputies Robert Troy and Michael Moynihan to discuss assessments of properties for connection to broadband services. Deputies Joe Carey and Tom Neville to discuss the ongoing overcrowding situation at University Hospital Limerick. So I now move to the first question in the name of Deputy Niamh Smith. 30 seconds to introduce your question.
Thank you very much, Cancorla. Minister, I wonder if today you could give us your roadmap and your commitment to double expenditure in arts and culture over the next 6 years, and if you'll make a statement on the matter.
Yeah, as Minister for Culture, Heritage and Gaeltacht, I greatly welcome the commitment given by An Taoiseach here beside me, over 7 years, to increase government spending in the arts and culture sector on a trajectory that will see funding doubled by 2025. And my department and I continue to work rigorously with the Taoiseach and all of my government colleagues towards delivering on this commitment. And a first and very significant step in the delivery process has been Project Ireland 2040, which gave explicit recognition to the importance of our culture, language and heritage to a sustainable development over the next decade and beyond. And this recognition is underpinned by the unprecedented commitment by government to invest €1.2 billion in our culture, our language and our heritage over the 10-year implementation of the NDP. And in April of this year, I was delighted to launch my department's sectoral plan investing in our culture, language and heritage. And this plan sets out significant investment on a phased basis over the next 10 years, prioritised across 3 areas. So we've €785 million for culture, €295 million for heritage and €178 million for our language. And this level of investment will transform our cultural and heritage infrastructure right across the country and goes a long way towards honouring the commitment to double government spending on arts, culture and heritage. In terms of current funding, allocations fall to be determined annually as part of the estimates process. And in 2018, total current funding for my department increased by 11.5 million, or just under 5%, to 248,659 million, including an additional 2.8 million for the Arts Council, an additional 1.7 million across all of the national cultural institutions, and just under 1 million in additional funding for the Heritage Programme, and an extra 1.4 million for the 20-year strategy for the Irish language. So the cumulative impact of these funding increases is further testament to the commitment to double government spending in this particular sector, and budget estimates 2019, as you know, are due to be presented on 9th of October next, and I can assure the Deputy of my ongoing commitment to achieving the best possible result for the arts and cultural sector, obviously taking into account the parameters set out in the Summer Economic Statement and the mid-year expenditure report published by the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. Thank you, Deputy, for your question.
First supplementary.
Thank you, Minister. I'm sure you're very familiar with and probably have met with the National Campaign for the Arts, and I did have the pleasure of hosting them here in Leinster House to make a presentation on their pre-budget submission. And I suppose, as an umbrella organisation who represent all the art forms right across the country, there is a concern and there is, I suppose, a worry from them in terms of how that roadmap is being set out by the government and the stated objective of doubling that investment, because doubling that investment is the commitment, and that's a real promise that the artists took with all sincerity on your own part. The concern might be that, and is from the National Campaign for the Arts, that there is a dilution in terms of the commitment by combining capital with current expenditure. So while the announcement in relation to capital investment through Project Ireland 2040 is very much welcome, there is no point in having stages without actors, galleries without art, or exhibition spaces without exhibits, Minister. So therefore, I would ask you and call on you that there is a firm commitment, and the commitment is to double the expenditure on arts through current expenditure for arts and culture over the next 7 years. Okay, thank you.
There's 1 minute.
Margaret Lascian Corla, I can assure the Deputy, as I mentioned in my earlier statement, that I am doing all I can to achieve the best possible result with the Minister Donoghue in terms of current spend. As I said, it's allocated on a yearly basis. Just to say, for example, that the current spend for 2017 was 237 million. It went up to 249 million for 2018, so that's an increase of 5%. The capital was 51, that went up to 54 in 2018, and that's 5.8%. It is important that we recognise the work that the Arts Council do, that there's also the cultural institutions. There's a lot of work going on in terms of the National Library, in terms of other project developments under the NDP. And at the end of the day, we also want to support the endeavours of Creative Ireland in terms of enabling the creative potential of each child, the enabling culture and creativity in every community, investing in our cultural infrastructure, and having Ireland as a centre of excellence for media production, and unifying our global reputation. But we have seen a steady increase over the years, and I'll be doing everything I can, Deputy, I assure you.
Final supplementary.
Thank you, Minister. That is comforting, and as I said, the current expenditure and the doubling of the current expenditure is where it's at for the artists and for the National Campaign for the Arts. You alluded to the Arts Council yourself, and we know it plays a very pivotal role in terms of the delivery and I suppose getting the funding out to the artists themselves. And there's a real working and good relationship between artists and the Arts Council, and that autonomy and that arm's length principle that the Arts Council holds, maintains, has established with the artists across the country is hugely important. And for that reason, the National Campaign for the Arts have asked that increased funding be made to the Arts Council. They have asked that 13.2 million in the upcoming budget would be made to the Arts Council to bring it back to the 2008 level of spending, which was 82 million, with a view to doubling the investment in the Arts Council. And I think that's hugely important, Minister, that we remain focused on the Arts Council. As I said, there is a huge good working relationship, great faith between the artists and the Arts Council. I think it's important that we maintain that and that we see government having that faith and that belief, and very much importantly given the money and the budget that's required to the Arts Council to do their job.
Final response, 1 minute, Minister.
Thank you, Deputy, and for outlining the good work that the Arts Council do. Just to delineate to you that their spend, obviously, and the money that my department gave them has significantly increased over the last number of years. Obviously, I'd still be endeavouring to obtain as much as I can this year, but it is important to stress that the 2008 spending was probably unsustainable. So while I've been endeavouring to ensure as much as I can, I think it's important that we remember that context. The National Development Plan itself is limited to capital investment and doesn't consider the current funding for artists and arts organisations, which is distributed by the Arts Council. And that said, there are vital links between the Arts Council's work and the delivery of my department's Culture and Creativity Investment Programme under the plan. But it is important that we support the artists on the ground. They're the people that need our assistance most. That is something that's very close to my heart in my role as Minister, but there is an arm's length principle there. What I have to try and do is secure as much as I can for my department in order to implement our commitment to double funding over the next 7 years, and within that will be an allocation to the Arts Council, and I'll be doing what I can to endeavour to do that.
Minister, Ireland is a highly attractive place for both Indigenous and foreign films productions, and Irish workers are known throughout the world for their skill and their craft. It is our objective as a party to build and strengthen and improve the experience of all the stakeholders within the sector and to grow it further. And to this end, back in July, an all-party Oireachtas committee carried out significant research on the film industry in Ireland and developed a report with 11 key recommendations in order to reform the industry. It identified some significant difficulties that needed to be reformed. And my question to you is, what steps has the Minister taken to implement those reforms?
2 minutes.
Margaret Lascan Corla, firstly I'd like to thank the Deputy and the members of the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Culture, Heritage and the Gaeltacht for their work and the work they undertook to produce the report on the development and working conditions in the Irish film industry. And I note that this report was launched last July, just a few weeks after the Government published its audiovisual action plan, and both the committee's report and the action plan have similar objectives in that they both seek to develop and improve employment in the Irish audiovisual industry. And the committee's report highlights the fact that Section 481 is a key and central component within the Irish film industry, and that it should remain central in the industry into the future. And likewise, the Audiovisual Action Plan identifies Section 481 as a critical support for the Irish production sector, generating jobs and providing a strong value proposition for the public purse. But there is significant overlap across recommendations of the Action Plan and the Oireachtas Committee report, Deputy, which you're probably aware of, particularly in the areas of Section 481, as I said, and training. And one of the key inputs to the Audiovisual Action Plan is a report by international audiovisual consultants Alsberg SPI with Nordicity, which identified the challenges faced by the Irish audiovisual industry and provided policy responses. And one of the consultants' key recommendations was the establishment of an oversight steering group charged with the overall implementation of the plan's recommendations. And this steering group has now been established and has already met twice since the action plan was published last July. And the group includes representatives of all government departments and state agencies with involvement in or the audiovisual industry. And I'm pleased to report that the report of the Oireachtas Committee was discussed at the recent meeting of the steering group, which took place on the 27th of September. And this included discussions regarding the importance of Section 481, compliance of the industry with aspects of tax and employment law, the holding of specific conferences and workshops to consider the development of the industry, including the need for an appropriate forum to consider employment issues. And further work has been carried out on all of these initiatives and announcements, and in relation to them will be made in due course. And the steering group will, of course, report to me at regular intervals. And I'd like to thank the Deputy for his question.
Margaret, yeah, and as you say, the committee did say that Section 481 was a central part of the industry, and most of the elements within the industry would indicate that. But that doesn't mean that Section 481 is perfect or without fault whatsoever. And recently, as you know, Minister, Mel Gibson's attorneys are accusing the producer of The Professor and the Madman of seeking to swindle Ireland's tax authorities. And allegations have been made that expenses have been inflated in the film so that the amount of tax relief achieved by the film is higher than it should be. So therefore, it means that the workers and the taxpayer of this country would be at a loss if those particular allegations are true. So if they're true, it means that Section 481 is not rigid enough. I know there has been a review of Section 481 by another department just recently, and maybe you could tell the Dáil what the results of that review were. Does it seek to close those particular loopholes? There was also in the report the finding that the €73 million of Section 481 are concentrated within 12 companies. And again, this was felt a very uneven spread of that particular tax relief, and that actually that relief might actually be militating against jobs coming to Ireland due to the oligopoly nature of the Irish producers sector. And the committee called for an international comparative study, and maybe the Minister would commit here today to an international comparative study with regards how to strengthen Section 481.
That's certainly something that we can consider, Deputy. Just in relation to Section 481, I'm not going to comment on any specifics that you mentioned. That's a matter for the Revenue and others to investigate that. But suffice to say that Section 481 film relief is a very valuable asset to the film industry in Ireland. And it's one of the primary mechanisms by which the government supports the film industry and attracts new film projects to Ireland. And the present scheme, as we know, concludes on the 31st of December 2020. It provides support in the form of a corporation tax credit related to the cost of film production, and the minimum amount that must be spent on the production is €0.25 million, and the eligible expenditure amount to qualify is €1.125 million. But the extension of Section 481 beyond 2020 and its administration will be considered further in the light of the recommendations arising from the consultants' reports. And just to remind you of the key points of the Audiovisual Action Plan, one of the recommendations was to consider extending Section 481 tax relief, as well as increasing the expenditure ceiling, revising the regulations and extending the relief to Ireland's game sector inter alia.
Minister, one other issue I want to bring to light. You mentioned training in your first part of your response. I am still getting allegations of production companies crewing their staff with a massive amount of trainees, in other words, to try and keep their crew costs down, and that's a difficulty that's happening in some elements of the industry as well. I'm also, one of the recommendations in our report was the disconnect between craft grades and the Irish Film Board, and I mentioned this to you before as well, that somebody from the craft grades should be nominated as a member of the Irish Film Board, so that there be proper communications between all elements of the industry here. I mentioned to you back in March and also again in July the idea that there would be a film forum set up. The film forum can be set up as part of Screen Ireland, and I don't think that has happened yet, and maybe if you can push for that as well. Also, the precarious nature of workers within the sector is a grievance, and you mentioned that there's going to be a look at that element, and I really push the Minister to make sure that we make work within the sector not precarious, because when it's precarious you can have serious problems and exploitation happening to workers, and given that we're funding this sector so much, there should be zero tolerance of any exploitation whatsoever.
The Department, through the Audiovisual Steering Group, will work with all partners to ensure that the industry operates to the highest standards. And as we know, there's new legislation from Minister Doherty which will be coming, which will address all of these issues. There's protections for workers in the film industry which will be part of that legislation that she's going to bring through. There will also be improved training and education as a key objective of the Audiovisual Action Plan, and Screen Ireland has already taken steps to strengthen its training arm, and Screen Ireland is also currently considering the practical issues around the establishment of a suitable forum, which is something that I think could be considered also. And the Alsberg report identified the importance of Section 481 on underpinning the Irish industry, and the Department of Finance is currently undertaking economic analysis of the relief. But we have to make sure that people who are working, even if it's on an ad hoc basis or on a loose contract basis, that they're protected, whether in whatever industry they're working in, particularly in the film industry.
Right, Bogmuch Rainish, Gin Kel Keshella, and Jack Damon O'Keefe, second, come the Keshach her.
Margaret Telascan Corla, Mar is olde tan na córcham an Gaeltachta agus na cóiltí pobl bhunaithe Gaeltachta lárnach go cur cín na Gaeltachta goiteine ach tá róir faoi leithechos na ceantarcha tearcarbrathe agus na hiileáin. Agus tá an cúna stáite tá ga íchlófa níos níos lún am bhí sé déim líonachchain. Céir tá geiste go sa dhéanana sa gáin asnéis le déanana cinnte goil chorm na féine le fáil ag na cólachtaí agus na córcham an seo.
Gur mai go dáire gabhmuide.
Gur mai go leis cóirla agus dús bhhailm bíos a ggóil chuig an teachta fáine an ceis seo agus intim leat leis an táhacht a bunse maidir leis an róla tá ocup fásta cibé an córcham an ná cholachtaí a bheith lonithe cibé na heán agus an tíir mór. Is as an solahar airgid a chuchttar fáil go blintal dúidir na Gaeltachta fí fómhír C7 de bhóta mar rinne chur chunamh fáil daigrachtaí pobl bhunaithe agus córcham an Gaeltachta. Náid as rud é gur eagraíocht náusplach reachtaúil iúidir na Gaeltachta Taki an teacht gur féin eagraíocht féin atá sé bhreichnú a dhéanú chunas is fearr is féidir leas a bhainteas an solahar sin I ggótheics na gcuirimí atá sanithe dí le na narratar na cuirimí a bhainean leis an orbairt pobl. Ní meiste a bhearú don teachta go bhfuil 3.3 milliún choir fáil an údaras fi bhómhír seacht gabhílas a hochttéig sin alantas ratha breise de 100 míle imlína I gcomparid le gabhílas a seachtéig agus alantas breise de 300 agus 100 míle san omlan I gcomparid le gabhílas a sééig. Bhí mar is old an teachta is fríd frosis na mastachan agus na ceannis a dhéantar leach dálaí an solahar airgid a chortar fáil bhain blintal de marinse agus go bhí jevan don ranna réaltas go léir. Sa cótheic sin tuí an teachta go nearmfar solahar airgid dúdras na Gaeltachta don bblion gabhílas a níéig agus a bheas I ggótheic an frosis sin atá bhain fí láthair. Mar sin ráite ní meise dú a treisiú uair amháin eile go neathaíonn meise mar arastad don Gaeltacht an tábhacht allmhór atá ag bun leis na córchaman agus na cholachtaí pobl bunaithe Gaeltachta atá preimhithe sa pobl agus lárna I ggur chun cin forbairdí aitiúile. Corann an córchaman agus na cholachtaí pobl bunaithe Gaeltachta réimse leathan seirbhísí aisina agus tachaíocht fáil. Tugann siad go don pobl agus is speculéad chun riachtanas an pobl áin agus a harú. Tá ró leathan acu fástú an úsid agus I gcurchan cin na Gaeilge is féidir ghlachu leis mar sin go leanfaí mé orm feim chumis leis na hiireachtaí leanúnacha atá bun le hallantas breise a chur fáil daigrachtaí pobl bunaithe agus chórchaman Gaeltachta.
Teachta Keith bumteáin.
Go into winning agus solahar no confidence and supply to galúntáin go dtí méadú an solahar náisiúnta go Gaeilge. Caiimid cuimrú freisin go bud é bliain na Gaeilge. Agus mar sin bhí súil go mach an tairan an dearbhú an sean go ggólaíonn for an gealún sin ní mé giríon figur inneo, fanna mé giríon tastan siúgi lein figur. Ach bhí súil go bhéit an taire deimhnú go seasfar leis an gealún sin sa gcuin tú muoinú agus solahar so ceiste bhí a héin a maiid se bhí seasan leis an gealún sin. As a dárad a maiid tú a déanana cinnte rug gur féidir letíanana aion rud a dúirtú fin údarás tá an tróir a thuairt go údarás mar éire tá sé san acht. A bhfuil a gceist leis an muoinú breisir tróir a thuairt go údarás. Breis airigid a chur a fáil gona córchaman agus gona cólachtaí pobl Gaeltachta.
Go mai go dáire bumteáin.
Ein tíam leat sé an níos mó rudí saléir an seach an seo thugann ach mar sin ráite bhí cruidín agan le ar a sin seir Joseph Madigan agus lom héan le Pascal Donahue an seach an siú hart agus bhí muid ag chur fíor brú leis an téalamh ag bunse maidir leis na rudí ratha agus go háirithe aniu fuú an ceist a bheith bunse aniu maidir leis an córchaman agus na cholachtaí cholachtaí a bheith tú ag rá fuúide. Bhí Misha Corbrú an Tara Pascal Donahue agus tam Kinse Foster Major leis an Munion agus Solahar idir Fianna Fáil agus Fine Gael agus an bliana siúr hart le bhí anrach hanig tosaiste Major leis an Dúsage Capital le údras na Gaeltacht agus formod tachiel uche ag an am sin agus bhí sin go bra. Nílasam cén córa bheith golará idir de páirte héin agus na páirte héin mar níl me sé teas a córa sin ach bí me sé sásta an brú ag bógará maidir leis an codú atá digé fuid an córcoman agus an cólachtaí atá bheith bra sásta lei sinna dhéanú agus éon cóabru a bheith den sin be sásta gobar le chéile.
Cíomh ceistena.
Is féidir leis an airh cinnte go mar Fianna Fáil i ggéirí chuna lai Fine Gael seasa le gach gealúnt atá sa ggóintú a rinne sibh ling gon trí cháinneisnéis. A seo dearan na féide mar dóideat a dearan leis a ggóintú seo ag an gáinneisnéis seo. Airastáid an ghlacannta leis nach naidó le na córchaman agus na cólachtaí poblbantha scáin na manisteoirí a chuineáil. Mar a bhfuil tar sásta pá réasúnach í a glenna banisteoirí agus leis a bhuiidir na takeop. Agus nach féidir ó béis sin na dhéanana mar a bhfuil takeíocht ceart ar fáil ón stáit.
Bumide den freagar dearna.
Nílasam cara bheith tarlóis a tóchaí ach tá me sé a gobar go déan son na drama bheith tá gceist aniu agus tá aithne mór agamsa ó na córcomar agus na cólachtaí i Tírchonaill agus tá sogam agus tá sonraí agamsa maidir leis na drama éagsúla bheith scapaí frídin siar ach mar sin ráite be me sásta agus tá achreicniú a golará fásta agus sa chóteach sin tuigim go bhfuil bartaí ag údras na Gaeltachta achreicniú strateise i dhéanú ar na córcoman Gaeltachta ar fad i ggóheics choirí bhaim strateis na heagréachtaí don 3 bliain amachróin agus tá me sé cinse maidir leis an leanúnachas agus an ról atá ag an córcoman an tábhacht atá ag an córcoman fásta agus an freigra atá go fásta maidir leis an ceanaracht ar na heileáin ar an tír mór agus tá siad san ag obair go dtíon ar an talamh agus an tiomant tá si sa léir ar an talamh fásta maidir leis an ról atá agus bé me sé sásta idir aniu agus an seachtain se thugann brú allhar a chur ar má Colacia Pascal aniu maidir leis an ról tábhacht atá tá si sa léir agus tá gá mór lei sin agus intíim le.
Dramaigad Caimis Bugger Regatin Ketchastella, throw a second to Richard Boyd Barrett.
Minister, you said Section 481 film tax relief is key to underpinning a film industry. Now, on Monday morning, yesterday, I was down with film workers outside Ardmore Studios where they were protesting and where they said there is no industry. There's an awful lot of money going into the hands of 10 or 12 companies who employ next to nobody. Next to nobody. But workers who worked for those same companies for 10, 15, 20 years, production by production, are disowned by those companies, have no security of employment, and this precarious employment and this denial of rights, and in the cases of these workers who've asked to meet you, Minister, you personally have requested that you meet them and you've refused to meet them, say they are now being blacklisted because they are insisting that they have the quality employment promised under the legislation that is supposed to be attached to Section 481.
Minister,
how do you respond to them?
Putting the question. Minister, 2 minutes.
Firstly, as I stated in my earlier reply, I'd like to thank the members of the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Culture, Heritage and the Gaeltacht for the work undertaken to produce the report, which was published last July, just a few weeks after the Government launched its Audiovisual Action Plan. And the Committee's report and the Audiovisual Action Plan have significant overlap and share the objectives of developing the Irish audiovisual industry and improving employment within it, which goes to the heart of your question, Deputy. And a steering group has been established, as I said, to implement the Audiovisual Action Plan and has already met twice since the Action Plan is published. And the group includes representatives of all government departments and state agencies that have an interest or involvement with the audiovisual industry. As I said, the report of the Oireachtas Committee was discussed at the recent meeting of the steering group on the 27th of September. And this included discussions regarding the importance of Section 481, compliance of the industry with aspects of tax and employment law, the holding of specific conferences and workshops to consider the development of the industry, including the need for an appropriate forum to consider employment issues. And further work is being carried out on all of these initiatives, and announcements in relation to them will be made in due course. And the steering group, as I said earlier, will report to me at regular intervals. But in relation to the specific details applied by the Deputy, it is important to note that employees in every industry and sector are all entitled to existing legal protections. And furthermore, I would like to draw attention, which I alluded to earlier, to the legislation being brought forward by my colleague, the Minister for Employment Affairs and Social Protection, the Employment Miscellaneous Provisions Bill 2017, which will improve the security and predictability of working hours for employees on insecure contracts and those working variable hours. And this legislation responds specifically to the commitment in the programme for partnership government to address the problems caused by the increased casualisation of work and to strengthen the regulation of precarious work. And I am happy to report that the bill completed report and final stage in the Dáil on the 12th of July this year, and it's anticipated that it will be introduced in the Seanad last Cancora this autumn.
Deputy
Minister, when is the Film Industry Forum recommended going to happen, where we get all stakeholders, and I mean all stakeholders, into a room to sort the problems out? And we need to look at things like a very serious matter. You know, when Mel Gibson starts suing a company that's produced a film, stating that the producers benefiting from Section 48 Tax 1 relief are essentially defrauding that tax relief by artificially inflating costs and expenses and milking the taxpayer, that's a very serious matter. And business just cannot continue as usual. And when there are workers outside Ardmore studio who say, and I certainly have seen evidence to back it up, are being blacklisted, not employed, even though they've worked for many years, working for these same production companies who are getting these loans and these grants. And we are talking about 80 million between the loans, grants and the Section 481 tax relief. We're talking about €80 million a year, which is supposed to give employment. And Minister, they have asked to meet you. The GMB, the Irish Film Workers Association, have asked to meet you. Will you meet them to hear what they have to say?
Minister's a minute to respond.
Screen Training Ireland is a division, as you know, Deputy, of Screen Ireland, and is the national training and development resource specifically created for Ireland's film and television industry, and it delivers training programmes for the film industry, and there's approximately 500 participants who take part in the training every year. And I'm committed to ensuring that any requirements in relation to training delivery deliver good quality outcomes for trainees in return for generous tax credits provided by the government. And this department, I'm not going to comment on Mel Gibson's issue, that's a matter for himself, but the department, it may well be, Deputy, but I'm not in a position to comment on it. The department will address the issue of training by working closely with Screen Ireland and having regard to the recommendations of the Crowe-Horwath report. And I know that over the past 2 years there have been sporadic industrial relation incidents made manifest through protests by film workers outside film sets, various offices in the Dáil. But Screen Ireland is addressing that, and I hope that there will be a forum that will develop from that all the stakeholders can be involved in, and that there come to an amicable resolution.
Final supplementary.
Minister, I'm asking you to meet these workers. You're obviously meeting Screen Ireland. Will you meet these workers who are in dispute and who've asked to meet you to hear their side of the story? I mean, it's a direct question. I wish you'd answer it. Because unless you get all the stakeholders involved in this discussion, you're not serious about trying to address the problems. The Mel Gibson thing is very serious. That could shred our international reputation. Not a mind the fact that there's public money, serious amounts of public money involved. Right, that needs to be investigated as a matter of urgency. Whatever the individual case, we need to establish, are there loopholes that can be exploited and are being exploited? And something needs to be done about the fact that we are putting 80 million into an industry and there is no standing workforce. No standing workforce. Right? Are you seriously? I mean, a child could take 80 million and employ a few hundred people or 1,000 people for a year, but there's no standing workplace. It's a hire them and fire them workforce, and if you dare say a word about your rights, about compliance with EU directives on working time directives, if you don't sign up to certain agreements which are imposed on you, you're blacklisted. That can't go on.
Minister, 1 minute to respond.
Thank you. In the 2011-2013 period, Screen Ireland regularly organised meetings called consultation committee meetings, which included stakeholders, as the Deputy knows, in the film industry. And the meetings were convened in the context of a production downturn, and attendees included trade unions and Screen Producers Ireland, and in some instances the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland and RTE. And these meetings were referred to an industry forum. They ceased when production activity picked up, but the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Culture, Heritage and the Gaeltacht met 5 organisations in January and February of this year, and these organisations included Screen Ireland, Screen Producers Ireland, SIP2, the Irish Film Workers Association and the GMB Union. And SIP2 disputed in writing some of the evidence given to the committee by GMB and IFWA. I know that it's clear that there's an inter-union rivalry there in some issues, but nonetheless there are good reasons, in my view, for holding an industry forum as called for in the July report on development and working conditions in the Irish film industry as published. And I think there is definitely validity in that, and there's a willingness to put this in place, and the Department has been in discussions with Screen Ireland in this regard. So consideration has been given to the most appropriate mechanism to convene a forum and a possible role for an independent chair. So the matter, Lascan will be discussed with me at a meeting which is planned with Screen Ireland. I believe it's on the 27th of October.
Dr. Catherine Connolly, throw a second.
For the Lascan Minister, my question is with the background of Galway, European Capital of Culture. And it's a very specific question in relation to how much money has been given to the Project 2020 to date, the robust project management structures in place, whether an Irish officer has been appointed, if so, when, and the name, please. 2
minutes.
Lascan Corla. Thank you, Deputy, for your question. I assume you're referencing Galway 2020. The Government has committed 15 million towards the funding of Galway 2020 as European City of Culture, and as outlined in my response to parliamentary question number 21, which was on the 21st of June, Deputy, my department provided a first tranche of funding in 2017 amounting to 250,000 to Galway 2020 towards certified expenditure already incurred by Galway 2020, and a performance delivery agreement to set out the mutual responsibilities of Galway 2020 and the Department of Culture, Heritage and Gaeltacht, and the terms of the drawdown of the funds under the agreement is currently being progressed by officials in my department, and they're working very closely with the Galway 2020 team to put in place the agreement, as well as support them in their work to deliver a strong culture programme in 2020. And in this regard, officials will be meeting with senior management from Galway 2020 on the 9th of October, which is next Tuesday, and I would expect that the agreement will be signed this month. And the stepping down of the creative director in May, and more recently, as you know, the chief executive, has been a cause for concern. And you probably, I'll talk to you maybe in supplementaries in relation to the new chief executive that's been appointed, Deputy. But it did create uncertainty around mechanisms for the delivery phase of the project and didn't assist the finalisation of the performance delivery agreement. But both myself and my officials are engaging on an ongoing basis to assist in resolving the current difficulties. And in this regard, I met personally with the chair of the Galway 2020 board on the 13th of September to discuss recent developments, including the stepping down of the CEO, who, as I said, has only just today been replaced, and cultural leadership plans. And I advise the Chair that I wish to see the leadership matters resolved quickly and as soon as possible in order that Galway 2020 can move forward to focus on the delivery of what we believe is going to be an ambitious and exciting programme for the year. And while I share the concern regarding the recent difficulties that most feel, I'm confident that the issues can be resolved and there are significant public resources being provided for it this year. Margaret Laskin-Corler.
I'm glad you're expressing concern, Minister, and I want you to clarify who has been appointed today. Now, the question I asked was, further to previous questions, how much money to date has been given? You've referred back to 250,000 at a particular time. The concerns haven't arisen today or yesterday. The concerns are going on for quite some time, and a number of key personnel have exited with serious questions in relation to the manner of that exit and whether money was involved in terms of packages.